I think a lot of people fail to understand that if they appeal things by asking Amazon questions like something's going wrong with their listing, is it this? Is it that? Can you call us and tell us? You're creating more confusion for Amazon.
Welcome back to Beyond PPC. I'm Brent from AMZ Pathfinder. We haven't done this podcast in a while, but who better to restart with than Chris McCabe here from Ecom Chris. Hey, Chris, can you give us a quick bio and intro for yourself?
Yeah, e-commerce Chris. So started e-commerce Chris 10 years ago. We're coming up to our 10th anniversary since I left Amazon. When I was at Amazon, I was in the so-called seller performance policy enforcement area. So I was one of those dreaded account investigators, suspending accounts, taking listings down, sending warnings, deleting listings, what have you. That morphed into a role where I would, first of all, not be with Amazon anymore. I'd be self-employed, but helping as a seller advocate, as a consultant who could get people to either steer clear of those kinds of problems, or if those problems like an account or listing suspension or anything similar had already happened, helping them resolve them and troubleshoot them as soon as possible so that obviously they'd lose less money and decrease the risk of further action by Amazon teams on their accounts. So
Right. Yep. And actually, Chris, you're the guy that I always go to when I have questions about this or when clients have questions about it. You and Leah are people that I really trust with that, and who better to have on the show here? I mean, the whole premise of Beyond PPC is kind of like it says in the title. We try to take the advertising stuff that I always talk about, that myself and my team are living and breathing, and kind of go into a different domain. So something that's a little bit out of our comfort zone and something we don't know too much about. So the format for this, just to reintroduce to the audience, since it's been a while, is basically pepper Chris or any other guest with questions that are related to their area of expertise. And then that allows me to learn, it allows my team to learn, and it allows you as the viewer to learn. So the theme of this one, we're a few weeks out. Well, we don't really know. The date hasn't been announced yet, but we're maybe a month out from Prime Day 2024, right? So the theme here is preventing ASIN takedown nightmares during and before Prime Day. So first question we got for you, Chris, is what are the most common ASIN takedowns and issues that you see causing problems in and around Prime Day, this critical time of year?
Yeah, and you as an agency owner will appreciate some of this because I'm sure brands that you work with see Prime Day approaching and they're goading you to, hey, we got to like really take advantage of this. We have to maximize the revenue year round, of course, but especially during Prime Day or other peak sales periods like Black Friday, Cyber Monday. The problem is whether it could be an agency owner, it could be a third-party service, could be a brand owner. Some people are reaching a little beyond their grasp in terms of what you can do within Amazon's listing rules and guidelines in order to make a quick score. And sometimes that results in a listing takedown that they weren't expecting. They include trademarked keywords, for example, that intends to attract lots of additional eyeballs to their listing, but doesn't take into account intellectual property violations, or trying to attract more eyeballs by making certain claims. Let's say it's like a supplement or a consumable, but they're making unsubstantiated disease claims or prohibited health claims, right? So reaching a little bit too far, potentially short-term getting a lot more people to look at the listing, but also getting it flagged, getting it taken down for restricted product reasons. So there has to be a balance that you strike. And again, it doesn't matter if you're the owner or you're the owner of a service, whoever it is that's working on that listing, A+ content service provider, whoever it might be, has to understand the compliance side. And I'm glad you brought up Leah McCabe, works with us at e-commerce Chris, because she is somebody who hears a lot of these, our listing was taken down, we weren't sure why, and then she starts digging into the details and she'll see the prohibited claims there, for example. Right. Or she'll see, I mean, sometimes it's not the fault of the brand owner. Sometimes it's an illicit ASIN contribution where somebody else is trying to tuck in certain back-end keywords onto your listing or making any kind of ASIN contribution that doesn't belong. Could be through a vendor central account they have. We've all heard about these loopholes, right? those are
Yeah,
things
maybe
to
you could
be
shed some
very,
light on that too later in the discussion because that's
I
I'm
know.
interested in some of those because the best way to combat these black hat things is to know about what they are and know how to defend yourself
Yes.
against them, right? But
Yeah, I kind of jumped the gun on the illicit ASIN contributions just because we've seen a lot of them already. And like you
okay.
said, we're only a few weeks from Prime Day, especially by the time you go live with this, we're probably, a couple of weeks before. People are already doing this. I believe it's a stress test. Like, let's see how quickly they identify it. Let's see how quickly they realize that we've gotten their listing flagged. And let's see if they just open a bunch of random seller support cases because they can't figure out that it is, for example, a vendor central contribution that shouldn't have happened, or some other sort of back end keyword abuse,
Oh
because
wow.
people are trying to figure out not just loopholes and black hat tactics or illicit means of getting you flagged. I mean, that's a given, but
Hmm.
that's at least a risk for any successful brand. It's not just, one category or another. The other piece to it is they want to see how quickly you react, or they want to maybe figure out, do you have an account manager that you're paying every month to identify this stuff and put it in front of you? How quickly do they react, right? A lot of our clients, I would say most of our clients, have an SAS core rep. So
Yeah.
somebody's managing their account from inside Amazon. For those unfamiliar, the
Yeah,
fee
and Chris,
tends,
remind the viewers, what's the cost for that again? It's a flat fee plus a percentage of revenue, if I remember correctly.
yeah, so it's staggered. I mean, for our clients, most of our clients are paying $5,000 a month for it
Right.
because they're at that tier. But just because your account manager or your SAS core reps, as they call them, open a ticket for you, or a case with Seller Central, seller support, doesn't mean that they know what's going on, doesn't mean that it's reviewed and responded to properly, right? That's another reason to be vigilant. Sometimes you have to kind of fact check what's going on, like, hey, there might be something else going on here. We've heard that there are bad contributions through Vendor Central, through back-end keywords. I mean, you kind of have to be aware of these things yourself because your account manager won't always know that this is an attack, that it's competitor abuse. I mean, they hear about these
Sure.
things. They hear about these things. They know they're a fact of life around Prime Day, but it's not necessarily first and foremost in their mind, which means you sometimes have to be the one in charge of keeping an eye on it and reminding them, like, hey, we found a couple of keyword, somebody might have overwritten our flat files, made an illicit backend contribution on our keywords, or async contributions adding terms that don't belong there. There are other things that can go wrong, right? I mean, it's going to make
Sure.
sense for me to
And
segue
and do
straight
you
into
think,
the.
Chris, from the perspective of someone at Amazon, their first inclination is to look for things that went wrong, not as attacks, but just screw ups in the system or submissions that were like done incorrectly or things that you did yourself? They're not necessarily looking as we might be as a lot of sellers, especially in some categories for let's call it like black hat or like attacks, right? They're not inclined to look towards that. That's not something that they see immediately.
Their assumption is probably going to be this is either an automation or a bot flag that
Mm,
Amazon made a mistake on. It's like a technical issue,
right.
or their seller, has made a mistake somewhere and they have to clean it up. The third option is going to be there's an attack somewhere, but you're probably going to have to keep them vigilant on it as well,
Right.
because their instinctive reaction is going to be, okay, well, either this is a false flag and it's on our side and we have to figure out why and clean it up, or the seller tucked in some keywords, added some text to the detail page, maybe did something to one of their images, so on and so forth. It's a seller driven error that has to be fixed. If you're only talking to your SAS core rep once a month,
Mhm.
which hopefully, if you're doing it once a month before Prime Day, that one time is a very fruitful phone call. You might not really be up to speed on what they're doing on your behalf, how vigilant they are being. So that's why we always say, we know you're paying $5,000 a month for this service that Amazon gives you. Maybe you've got a good relationship there, maybe not, but it's going to be on your shoulders to keep an eye on this stuff for the simple sake of, if something happens and it's right before Prime Day, there's not going to be enough time to troubleshoot it if you're doing some basic communication with your
Right.
rep to get them up to speed. You're
Right. That
going to
makes
lose
sense.
hours, you're going to lose days, which again, when it comes to black hat tactics and abuse, your attacker knows that. They know you might not be up to speed with your account manager. They might know that you're not keeping an eye on your listings. And they're counting on your slow reaction time or submitting an appeal that isn't really on target, that doesn't really deal with what's going on, or it's low level stuff. Opening a case with support. They're hoping that if they waste time or spend time attacking you, that it's going to pay off because you don't know how to handle it. That's what they're counting on.
Okay, that brings two interesting things to mind. First of all, I want to kind of like follow up on the question. So,
Yeah.
in general, common things like people trying to over optimize the listing, try to get that extra 5-10% out of there, and that actually causes issues. Or people that have attacks happen, which it sounds to me like you said, it's almost like in network security they call it like pen testing, like penetration testing. So it's like red team, blue team. It's like they're trying to break into your network or access your files. And what they're doing is they're just kind of poking, right? They're just testing and seeing what your reaction is, because they're not trying to actually attack. They're trying to get a reaction and then gauge how to respond to your reaction.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. This very advanced tactic, it sounds like.
Well, it's very easy for them to evaluate the success.
Mm-hmm.
If your listing's down 7 days versus 1, that's noticeable. They made money off of it. They caused angst and anxiety and revenue loss to their competitor. And also they know what to do next time. Maybe they can try the same exact technique the next time, even after you fix it this time. Right. Or maybe next time they'll keep your listing down longer because they'll make some modifications and do a couple of different things. But they're basically generating a, if you want to think of it in terms of baseball, like a scouting report. What is our competitor seller like? If we throw them, different kinds of pitches, which ones can they hit? Can they hit everything? Can they hit none of it? Can they hit some of it? Okay, well then we'll adjust accordingly. Because you might have an adversary out there who is doing stress tests like this across multiple categories from multiple accounts, selling multiple different types of products just to see what they can get out of it. Sure. Well, obviously during Prime Day, they're going to reap a much larger harvest than if they pick some random week to do it. Well, in the month of June, they're probably just experimenting to see what works and what doesn't, so that by the time you get to game day, you've already got your plan together and you already know what's going to make you the most money. And of course, while your competitors are scrambling, trying to troubleshoot, going to urgent care, trying to figure out what's the best way to address it, you're selling like crazy and you are focused on sales the way they wish they were.
And that's the nightmare part of the title that I spoke about earlier. Having a product down during Prime is a nightmare. One thing to close out this question and this thought is, it sounds like having a SaaS core rep is kind of like having a physician, right? You have someone you can go to and get advice, and you pay them, and you meet with them. Hopefully, not once a month with your doctor, but you have a relationship with that person. But ultimately, your health is your responsibility. You're guiding it, and you're driving it, and you need to be on top of these things and be knowledgeable about it, such that you can communicate that with your doctor or with your SaaS core rep. It's an interesting analogy. I'm not sure if it holds up entirely, but you are responsible for that ultimately.
Well, like getting a second opinion. Your doctor may say, go get a second opinion. They might not, but it's going to be your decision whether or not you get a second opinion on any diagnosis. Your SAS core rep is going to give you an opinion. They're going to have things they can do for you. They can try to move things around internally. I'm sure you've heard that sometimes those cases get stuck or they come back with a less than satisfactory answer. Sometimes they just say, well, it's under review and I can't control that process. I'm waiting to hear back from that team. I'm going to nudge them, but I can't control how quickly they review something and come back with a response. That's common. You can't be 100% dependent on things they do or don't tell you, right?
Yeah, understood. Okay, so what does it mean for someone to have good account health? Because I always hear this in like blog posts and the podcast. Someone's like, "Oh, have good account health." It's like, well, what does it actually mean? I know there's scores like IPI score, right? And there's a couple others out there, but this is not something that we touch too much at Pathfinder. So could you educate me and the audience a little bit about what that means to have good account health?
Very simply put, if you're looking at your account health dashboard, you want a series of zeros for performance notifications. I mean, those are essentially demerits on your account health. They might not immediately impact your account health score. Your account health might be 1,000. You might be looking great. But they could down the road if you don't resolve them. They give you time to resolve them, of course. Some of them require appeals. Some of them, they just say, hey, keep an eye on this. You're getting a lot of returns. You got to figure out what's going on with this product. Maybe your due diligence on how your detail page is performing needs to be upgraded. Maybe product quality needs an assessment. You got to kind of figure out what sort of product inspections you can improve. Maybe you've got something going on with your manufacturer. It could be a lot of things, but if you're looking at unresolved intellectual property violations, unresolved policy violations, unresolved item defect, item condition complaints, that means there's some work to be done. There's something left for you to do. So even if your account health score isn't immediately impacted, it could be soon enough if you don't figure out what's going wrong. How do we appeal it? How do we clear these? Do we have to submit an appeal? Do we just have to send an invoice in? Is it an authenticity complaint where we just have to provide some supplier information? It could be that simple.
Yeah.
But the diagnostic phase is where some people get bogged down. It's not necessarily their fault. Sometimes the messaging from Amazon is very opaque, very hard to understand what they want, very generic. There are people that contact us every day like, what do they want? Do they want an improvement
Right,
plan?
right. Yeah.
Like, do they want us to do something? Are we supposed to call them? Are we supposed to write an appeal? Are we waiting for them to review something? And I don't blame them at all, because quite often Amazon itself like sends the wrong message, like literally sends the wrong message, and it doesn't have instructions about how you're supposed to respond.
Wow, I had no idea it was so
Yeah.
unclear in some of these cases. That's kind of surprising to hear. I mean, obviously, as a business owner, you want like an action step, right? So you and your team can dive in and say, all right, step one, let's find this report or compliance thing. Step two, let's figure out how to make it as good the first time as we can. So when we submit it, the problem is solved. But if it's unclear, where do you start? I guess talking to you is one thing, or just frantically Googling, right? Trying to figure out what's going on.
Sometimes they do tell you reply to this message. Like there will be some indications on how to respond, but they won't be 100% clear about what you're responding with. That's why we get a lot of questions. Do they want a plan of action? Do they want a written appeal that is not a plan of action using the plan of action format? Are they telling us that we have to dispute this if we don't think it's accurate, and that nothing except a dispute will be accepted? It's kind of like, that's why people have to call in and talk to account health reps, and account health services reps have become the go-between for interpreting, help me read your tea leaves type stuff. And of course, sometimes calls to account health reps create more confusion and more misunderstanding, which we can talk about in a second. But ideally, you at least get some indication on what are we supposed to do next, who expects to review it. And of course, sometimes with those misunderstandings or confusion, you'll appeal and you'll get a rejection, right? You'll get this isn't the right information, but they won't tell you why it's not the right information, and they don't tell you what information was expected. It's very inefficient on Amazon.
So you're back to square one, essentially.
Yeah,
trying to figure it out.
Very inefficient on Amazon side. If they had improved communication, I think they would reduce a lot of friction and additional work on their side as well as on the side of sellers.
Yeah, it sounds like a problem with scale, like many things that Amazon faces. I think just the sheer scale is almost impossible for us all to imagine. So here's another question then. What should Amazon brand owners, Amazon, businesses, what should they not do if a listing suddenly goes offline, right? So, nightmare scenario, week out from Prime, listing disappears, you get a message from Amazon, maybe it's cryptic, maybe it's straightforward. What should they not do? Because there's plenty of things you could recommend that someone does, but what are things you see people do that they should not do, that they are doing out there?
I guess, I can start with, it's okay to panic, but don't panic and then do things. The initial panic is completely understandable. It's normal. It's natural. We've all been there.
Sure, fight or flight.
Right. That makes sense to me. But panic plus I'm going to do 7 things before I go to sleep. Those are the wrong. That's the wrong combination.
Yeah, at 3 a.m.
Right. Which again, we understand why these things happen, but it doesn't mean there won't be lasting consequences. It doesn't mean it's the right thing to do for the health of your listing, your account, or your own sanity, because you're probably creating more duress and more revenue loss and more problems by doing that. First of all, if it is at 3 a.m, or if it is right before Prime Day, let's say, you are making a very important business decision at your weakest moment, which is probably not a recipe for success. Number one. Number two, the content that you create, let's just say they are requesting that you put an official appeal together. The content you create and submit is probably going to be off target, even if you think in that moment, I read their message, they specified what they wanted, and I went blow by blow through it, and I gave them something for everything they asked for. take their messaging with a grain of salt. Sometimes it doesn't mean give us an inline in bold text response to everything we put in this message. Like you said, it's about scale. Their messaging is generic. In a lot of cases, it's canned copy and paste messaging, right? So you have to understand how to interpret what they're asking you for before you even put pen to paper or fingers on a keyboard, because submitting appeals just kind of in the scatter shot, let's just throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. That might work for other things in life. It doesn't work for Amazon, because you're handing them a reason to say, I don't know what this person's doing. I don't know what's going on. I don't know why they sent us this stuff. All I know is this is a rejection. We're pushing it back and we're going to make them start all over. And it doesn't get you closer. It's not like, well, we're going to submit 7 appeals overnight and the first 6 are going to get us 10% closer to the finish line on resolving this. I wish it worked that way, because then you'd at least have a plan.
Right. And as business owners, we often want to feel like busy, right? It's like I'm doing the thing, right? I'm making the problem go away. But in reality, there's a big gulf between like busyness and busy work and effectiveness, and like being, having a level of actual impact on whatever the goal is.
Right.
So okay,
have a strategy.
That's a good one. What should they not do?
Doing things doesn't mean you have a strategy. Your strategy can't be, I'm going to get my team to send this in before the close of business today, no matter what they put together, no matter what they send in, no matter what team it goes to, no matter what kind of response back. My plan is to get this done immediately. That's not a strategy.
Okay, understood.
Yeah.
Just trying to get under the wire before the end of the day. Not a strategy. So actually, this brings up the next question and the next idea here, which is that you, for years, have talked to me about service providers out there that offer case resolution, reinstatement services. And in your view, you've seen many of them make basically a giant mess without resolving the issue, because they don't have the real understanding of how to process these things and what paperwork to submit and what tone to take and who to talk to in some cases. So what are some signs of companies that do this, and like how to stay away from them? Because you've expressed to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but sometimes you spend a lot of time basically, untangling the knotted ball of twine that someone else who had another one of these services tried to resolve the issue. And you guys spend a lot of your precious time undoing that. And that actually is additional cost for a business on Amazon, because they're paying you guys for your valuable time to undo the problem that someone else made. So what are like some red flags to watch out for in this scenario, so that, viewers of this show know to stay away from that, and they know to go with, like, let's call it more reputable or experienced firms that can deal with these problems?
Yeah, and some of the people that we deal with have hired somebody else just because of price. They just went for the cheapest service, and they assumed that we're all doing the same stuff. We're all the same because we all have similar content on our websites or something like that.
Right. They assume it's a commodity market. Yeah.
Right. So I mean, there's the price point piece of it, which is like, if you're making the assumption that all services are equal before you even start, then my advice to you would be, then grab the cheapest one you can find. It's the lowest cost to you, and see if it pans out. But don't expect it to be immediately resolvable later if that person compounds your problems, or that service makes it harder to resolve than originally, right? Than what you were facing. After several more days have gone by, you've probably submitted more appeals. One of the agitating factors, I guess you'd call it, is that Amazon kind of starts tuning you out once you've appealed something several times with either generic content or similar content. If you're not really changing what you send in, or if you're just sounding increasingly desperate, or if you sound like you're guessing. I mean, we see appeals. Some of the stuff I've complained to you about is the appeal isn't even on topic. Like, it's about something else that wasn't even what happened.
Right.
Well, it's probably a generic template, and it's not even a service provider every time. Sometimes the seller just finds it online somewhere and they copy and paste it into like a seller central appeal form, or they hire a service that basically went online and found it somewhere and copied and pasted and made it sound like they wrote it, original content. Either way, imagine what Amazon sees. They see a template that 14 other people have submitted that day.
And they're not impressed.
They know it's copy and paste. They believe that you were much more interested in just getting the appeal out of the way than actually answering their questions or addressing any of their concerns. We have to kind of set aside for the moment whether or not their questions are legit or whether their concerns make sense. I mean, Amazon's appeal questions don't always make sense to us.
Hmm.
But for the moment, let's assume that it's a legit flag and you should be composing an appeal that makes sense and addresses a few key points. If you give them generic content, and to give you an example, everyone loves examples. One warning sign is like the template will mention stuff that has absolutely nothing to do with the policy violation. Like sometimes there'll be a bunch of stuff about intellectual property tucked in, and you're
Hmm.
like, that has nothing to do with this flag. What is that in there for? It's a telltale sign to whoever's reading it at Amazon that you grabbed a template from somewhere, or you hired somebody pretending to be experts, but they're just template mills or template sellers.
Yeah.
And what that tells Amazon is you're not serious about selling on Amazon. You're not serious about addressing their concerns. You're not service, you're not serious about that particular ASIN resolving any concerns they have. So why should they spend any time reading it? And that's one reason why you hear from so many sellers complaining like, we've been rejected 10 times with the same generic template from Amazon. Well, if they think you're giving them nothing, they send you a nothing answer back. And
Right.
that's one thing that we complain about, because we'll ask a brand owner like, well, you can kind of tell by the third attempt you're not going to really get any pay dirt by using this stuff, right? We understand why you're talking to us. The reason they're having the conversation with us is because they've already gone down the wrong road and they've already hurt themselves immensely with some faulty decision making. But yes, by that point you're going to incur some additional cost, or we're going to have less than exciting news for you, which may include something like you have to throw this all away and go back to square one. That does happen. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So it sounds like there's let's call them template jockeys out there who are using this
Yeah.
stuff. And essentially some of that like intellectual property you mentioned that gets jammed in. It almost sounds like they have an approach to it that's like, well, it's like a law contract or something, right? It sounds like a legal thing. I'll just put all this templated stuff in there to like, CYA, as they say, like legal stuff,
Mhm.
right? But actually Amazon's not looking for extraneous information. They're really looking for the core of the thing that they asked you about or asked you to address, and they don't want any cruft, is what it sounds like. They want you to
Yeah.
give them the essential pieces and demonstrate that you have an understanding of it. So there's a logic to this,
It's not
form of
just a road
gathering here.
exercise.
Right, not at
I,
all.
I I think now we're halfway through 2024. Years ago, people used to view this as a road exercise and they would just submit whatever. Now I think people understand this is not a road exercise. If you give them generic content, it's probably not going to work. At that point, it's up to you to decide, well, how much time, effort, energy, whatever are you going to invest in fixing this and resolving it? Because if you come across as very unimpressive to Amazon, they're not going to spend time on it. Like
Hmm.
you say, they have problems scaling this work anyway. I think that's also well known, well understood at this point, is
Yeah.
that their ability to scale seller performance or policy enforcement type work is almost non-existent. So if you hand them a really good reason to skip over you and ignore you, they're going to grab at it, and they're going to use that as an opportunity to push past you and get on to the next person. So how does that resolve anything? How does that fix something? Presumably, as the owner of that business, you're interested in solving it, not just creating more work for them and more work for yourself. If you're talking to people who are like, we're going to open a bunch of seller support cases for you and it's magically going to get fixed, you probably already know in advance. If all they're doing is talking about seller support, you already know that's not going to work.
Right. Okay. So they don't even know the right way to talk about it, which is to tell itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if they
Okay.
have no plan to get you unstuck, if their appeals get you stuck, and then they're just kind of shrugging, the most recent example I've seen is, kind of, well, we tried. Like I see the emails because obviously people are complaining to us about other service providers all the time, right? I've
Mhm.
told you about that in the past because we've seen their
Yes.
emails, and they get an email back from whoever they hired that'll say, shucks, we did what we could. We're out of ideas. Oops, sorry. Those are the types of people who are just trying to get as many people to pay them as possible. They're not
Hmm.
really focused on the quality of the work they're providing in the consulting or in the service. They're
Right.
just trying to get as many people to pay them as possible. And then they'll say, oh, well, we tried. Your case is harder than somebody else's, but what do you want us to do? You
Right.
paid us to try and we tried. That's a sign. If they don't know how to get you unstuck after promising you the world when you first came in the door, well, that means that they didn't have a plan for getting you unstuck if they ran into any obstacles or any brick walls. Well, if you know that going in, that means they're probably not the people right to solve the problem in the first place.
Yeah. So as soon as they hit that first obstacle, that first barrier, they have no recourse. It sounds like
Right.
they're kind of out of ideas and just doing the shrug
It,
emoji.
I think it's partially because they've observed other service providers out there. It could be somebody that they saw at a conference or at an event somewhere.
Mhm.
They know that other people are doing what they're doing, are offering something, and it's not their bread and butter, maybe. It's like a side hustle. And they know other people are kind of getting away with not doing a very good job, and no one really calls them out on the carpet for it.
Yeah.
And so they're kind of mimicking what somebody else is doing. Hey, those guys are competitors of ours or whatever, and they're making money at this and they're not doing a very good job. Why do we have to bend over backwards to do a good job? That's part of the problem.
And
Yeah.
also, me understanding that complexity is why Pathfinder has never tried to tackle something like this. I have zero
Right.
interest in doing it, and obviously, I call you and Leah to handle that kind of thing. And if we have questions, that's where we go to. So no questions
But it's
about
the
that.
same for us. Like, would we
Mm,
be all of a sudden, hey, there's money in ads? Amazon ads is a huge deal. PPC is a huge market. Well, we
mhm.
don't know much about it, but we're going to offer it and just take a stab at it. Like, that principle also applies to us. We don't do these things because it's not our bread and butter. We're not experts in it. So why would we take somebody's money and just kind of shadow some other service and try to mimic what they're doing and
Yeah.
and pass it off as expertise that we should be paid for? So I mean, it goes both ways, right? We don't
Okay.
want to, do something that you're an expert in if we're not experts in it as well.
I think to wrap up on this question though, Chris, I think the one reason is because it's non-falsifiable, right? So you can send a bunch of messages and do a bunch of activity, and it looks like, oh, they're busy, they're doing
Right.
stuff, good, they're handling it for me. When with PPC, most Amazon business owners that I know have a pretty good handle on what the numbers mean, and they can go in their dashboard, they go into third-party software, and they can look at it at any time and say, is it doing good or bad or otherwise? Objectively, how is this doing? How is it affecting my bottom line? There's numbers, and Amazon attribution is not perfect, but it's pretty close,
Yeah.
and it's easy to see what the outcome is. With this, it's a little bit less clear. There's a lot of gray areas. There's a lot of like pieces that are shrouded in mist. It's kind of hard to understand,
Right.
and that's why I think that some of these services exist, or they continue to do what they're doing.
And there's not a lot of checks and balances built into the community, I think,
Yeah,
in terms of like vetting claims. There's just a lot of promotion, which, a business owner, a brand owner, hopefully they've been around the block a couple times. It's not up to us to teach them how to vet every single service they hire. On a certain level, it's like, I suppose you can do trial and error. I mean, that's a decision you can make. It's probably going to cost you a lot of money and a lot of angst. That is an approach.
and most
Um,
importantly, on Amazon at certain times of year, time. Right,
yeah,
time is the real consideration here for some of
of
these
course.
periods.
Time
Speaking
is
of which,
precious for everybody. Yeah.
yes,
Include.
especially at certain times of year. So speaking of which, what is one big change that has occurred from last year's Prime Day to this year's Prime Day? And let me set the stage a little bit for ads. Every year we examine our Prime Day strategy and we say, okay, what has changed in the ecosystem that we need to take into account? What are the new features? What are the features that are removed or depreciated? What kind of new data sources do we have? What new clients do we have this year? How do all these things factor into our approach? And then we take our playbook from last year and we, take out some pieces, add new pieces, modify others. That's necessary. So I'm imagining that with you, it's the same. Amazon changes every 3-6 months. There's always something new happening. And I don't have the kind of insight that you do into your market, in your space. But if
Yeah.
you had to look at July last year, July this year, what are some of the biggest changes?
I mean, we'll see what July looks like next month. I guess I'm kind of hoping it looks more like last year. This year,
Mhm.
we've had way more listings taken down in the month before, even the weeks before now, Prime Day. Account suspensions are way up from what we were seeing last year. I'm hoping that's just a June thing and that's not going to continue into July. I guess we'll see in a couple of weeks.
Okay.
But typically, when it's like, Q4 is the best example. Typically, they're not shutting all these people down in November. They wait until the peak is passed and then they lay the hammer down on some of these different, could be policy violations, listing violations, product and safety compliance, whatever it might be. People who are accused of harming other sellers, attacking competitors. Normally, like, they don't do it because, PR reasons, right? You would think Amazon
Yeah.
wants to say, this is the biggest Prime Day ever. we were up 7.2% over last Prime Day. They always want to say that every Christmas or Q4, and they want to say it every Prime Day. So it's counterintuitive to be like, we're going to have a purge and we're going to take all these listings down and all this FBA inventory that we ourselves want to see leave the building as quickly as possible won't be able to sell because of all these restrictions and all
Very
these
good point.
compliance investigations. I myself, I shouldn't be surprised when these things happen, but we're like way into the month of June. I myself am surprised at how many account suspensions we've seen this month and how many listing flags. I know some of it's runaway automation. I know some of it's bots and they're always tinkering with AI. I totally get it. That's not the same as it was last year. They're implementing new AI. They're experimenting more with AI probably every month that goes by. So that isn't shocking. But what's shocking is the timing. It's very different from last year's Prime Day when I just don't remember this much friction and turbulence way into the month of June, because there are people who are losing their entire accounts right now that probably won't be reinstated by Prime Day. People we hear from, because not everybody we hear from necessarily hires us to fix it. Some of those people are looking at some heavy duty compliance investigations. They've already appealed a bunch of times and been rejected. Amazon's not treating them with kid gloves. They're acting like, hey, we need something big time from you. Otherwise, we're not even reinstating you. Forget about Prime Day. We're not reinstating you at all. And that's like kind of how it goes when they do a purge. And I don't remember last May and June being as turbulent as this year. Now, maybe they'll just, you and I both talk to sellers who magically get reinstated one day without really changing much in their approach. And maybe that'll happen this year. Maybe some of those people will be back up by July 15th. But I've just noticed some heavy-handedness that wasn't there in previous years. Time will tell if it's driven by runaway AI or if it's just compliance teams who are, catching up from stuff that was never addressed in Q1. It's hard to say.
I have another theory, Chris, kind of related to that, which is some of the new fees, which I don't want to get into too much because I don't think that's an expert area for either of us. But the new fees for inventory that's sitting there too long, not having enough inventory, all these new fees. Inbound shipping was the biggest one, I think, that got most people talking and angry and chattering. I think that a lot of those are designed to wash less serious sellers and less serious companies out of the Amazon ecosystem. I think that not only is Amazon trying to make money on those, but they're also saying, well, if you can't handle these fees and you can't streamline your system to the level that we need you to logistically, because it's quite a high bar, too bad. It's not like 2018, 2017 anymore. You can't just send, a huge amount of inventory into FBA warehouses and say, well, that's off my hands. I don't have to worry about that anymore. I just need to sell it now. It's a mechanism for kind of getting people out of the system. That's a bit of a tinfoil hat conspiracy theory I have. Maybe let's see if it's true, if it's not true. But maybe the same thing is happening with compliance, where they're saying, all right, no more kid gloves, like you said. Let's take this deadly seriously and treat everyone like they're a Fortune 500 or like a large CPG brand. And like, okay, you got to get your compliance in a row. You got to get your ducks in a row. And they're not going easy on anyone anymore.
Well, like thinning the herd, it's kind of a similar concept, because they view somebody who's, let's just say, a brand owner that they consider, hey, you're not pulling your weight by not selling through inventory fast enough. You're creating costs for us. Yes. You're creating administrative costs. You're creating other costs in our systems for inventory management and for other things. And you know what? We've decided we don't want to carry your costs anymore. So unless you can figure out everything we want by the deadline we want it and get all your stuff sold through very, very quickly, especially at peak periods of the year, you are now going to assume those costs, not us. And like you said, if you're like, hey, hold on a second, I want to join a protest group and sign a bunch of petitions instead of doing what you want me to do, which essentially is create less costs for Amazon, less administrative headaches for Amazon, and selling through inventory very quickly, 12 months a year, we're willing to let you float away and do something else with your time or your inventory. Whether or not that means going to Walmart, going somewhere else, how viable that is a story for maybe the next time we talk. But I kind of agree with your assessment.
Interesting. Okay, cool. Well, I'm glad somebody smart out there thinks there might be something to it. Holds a little bit of water. That's one that I've been kind of ruminating on. Haven't really talked about it publicly too much, but I don't think.
And I'm glad I'm considered smart by somebody like you. That's
I
That's a win-win on both sides.
Well,
Yeah.
we can sit here on the call and flatter each other all day, Chris. But I got one additional like bonus round question
Oh,
because
wow.
it's something you mentioned earlier in the call, and now I want to ask you about it. So, what is the difference with vendor and 3P when it comes to submitting changes on listings, right? Because there's always this hierarchy of seniority on a listing, right? Like, Amazon has the highest tier, of course, but then let's assume there's a couple people in the buy box. The seller that is below Amazon is the one that has the most kind of history on there, the most credibility. But what advantage does like 1P give you over a 3P seller? Because we have a lot of clients now that are kind of hybrid. They have a 1P account and a 3P account. I guess you could call it 2P. It's right between the two. And they're kind of like using the best of both worlds. And part of what they're doing that for is this ability to use vendor for things like that. So could you like shed some light on that? Because I personally am pretty confused on this. I want to learn more about it.
So we don't actually work on vendor, so we might not be the best person to answer that. The problem with, I'm very, very pro 3P,
Hmm.
and I'm not so into 1P and never really wanted to get into it
Okay.
because you are locked in with 1P.
Hmm.
You're surrendering a lot of freedom. You don't have a lot of maneuverability with price or really anything because you've got a contract, you've got an agreement that you've signed, X number of units. You send us the purchase orders and we're sticking to this price, and you have to agree to that for a determined amount of time, despite what might happen in terms of market forces or the economy. Your
Sure.
costs could go up. That's the biggest reason why 1P kind of scares us in a sense. So in terms of advantages or disadvantages, not sure. But with 3P, you've got a little bit more leverage to be like, okay, our product is costing us more this year than last year. Let's just say inflationary reasons, we have to increase our prices. Obviously, Amazon mandates that you have the same prices across all platforms, which, that's kind of a long story. But when you're locked in with vendor, you don't have a lot of wiggle room until the next contract period or the next renegotiation. With 3P, you can at least say, we have to move our prices up, not because of our fault, because everything's more expensive. The entire internet of products is more expensive,
Right.
services
Or
more
there's a
expensive,
tariff or materials become more costly or
transpo,
something with shipping
shipping
happens.
costs, transportation costs, marketing costs, ad costs. Maybe you had to onboard a new influencer and that costs you some real money. And that's what you have to do. You and I think, are going to have a subsequent conversation about, what are the creative costs? I mean, this is one of the pain points agencies tell us, because influencer marketing, I would imagine those costs are at an all-time high. Yes, there are other influencers that aren't as expensive versus like a celebrity who you're paying to push your product. Those are huge game changers that might impact your price. 1P locks you in. You're kind of like a prisoner of that price, aren't you?
Right.
So
Yeah, I guess in a way, and a lot of the brands that do it, they're large enough to be able to deal with that because Amazon's one of their sales channel, not their only one. But a lot of the clients we work with and historically I've worked with are 3P, and
yeah,
yeah, Amazon's the majority of their sales. I guess my question was more about the seniority on a product listing, like
yeah,
how someone's able to change it. So one of the black hat things you see is someone with a 1P account will go in and submit changes on someone else's listing that's
yes.
3P, and since they're 1P, they have higher, in the food chain, I guess we can call it, right? If that's
ASIN
correct.
contribution, higher priority ASIN
Contribution.
contributions. Yeah.
That's what it's called. I couldn't remember.
Yes. So, but if you're, let's assume you're the trademarked owning, brand registered brand owner, of course.
Hmm.
We do work on cases where people have to do escalations, not just within brand registry, within executive teams at Amazon, just to fix that. But you are supposed to be able to rectify that, and you should be able to, even if somebody makes invalid 1P contribution like that, because they're not the brand owner and you are.
Right.
Is it a backdoor? Is it a loophole? Is it as bad as it used to be? Not quite as bad as it used to be, but it is still a problem. So
Hmm.
we do encourage people to keep an eye on that and monitor it, because a lot of people don't understand these dynamics. That's one reason it's good if they're talking to, let's just say they haven't talked to us about it. It's good that they're talking to you about it, because you've taken the time to educate yourself. You've either been through it the hard way and you know it from doing, or you've heard about it and you know that this is a problem, because a lot of brand owners are still kind of left out in the cold on this stuff, even though it's something that's been going on for years. I think I did my first article on this or podcast about it in like 2017 or 2018. A long time ago.
Yeah.
And it amazes me that these concepts do float around. Some of these are newer brand owners, and it makes sense. Like, how would you
Sure.
necessarily, it's the same as black hat tactics. Like if you're brand new and you're only 18 months in, yeah, I mean, you probably don't know about some of these fraudster, shady tactics that competitors use to attack each other, but you have to get an education really quickly on it, because if they're not working with you already and you can't tell them, or if they're not knowledgeable about us and we can't tell them and they're learning on their own, it's going to be a steeper learning curve, more headaches, more problems. And I'll kind of close with this, because I think a lot of people fail to understand that if they appeal things by asking Amazon questions like something's going wrong with their listing, is it this? Is it that? Can you call us and tell us? You're creating more confusion for Amazon. If you go to them with certainty and confidence and you say, we know it's either this or this, and I'll explain why, or forget about that. You say, this happened to us before. We had this a couple months ago. This is what's going on. They are more likely to interpret it correctly. I know this sounds wild, because why should you have to tell them? But in reality, if you can tell them what's going on, they're going to guess less. They're going to transfer it to the wrong team less often. They're going to turn the wheels in the right direction a lot quicker, which reduces the resolution time for you, reduces the headache and the administrative costs, and of course it reduces the amount of money you lose because the ASIN is down. If you're injecting confusion and misunderstandings into the appeals process, or via seller support cases, or calls to account health, or calls with your account manager, whatever it is, you're just adding to the time it takes to fix it. So that's kind of my key pre-Prime Day pointer for people, is don't introduce more confusion. I know there's kind of no excuse for Amazon not knowing what's going on with their own teams and tools, but just to be practical, don't introduce more confusion into that pipeline, because you will regret it if it takes longer.
Understood. That's a great place to end, Chris. I think we'll call it there. Thanks so much. This was really, really valuable, as always, speaking with you and I appreciate your support over the years and answering all my dumb questions through the years, and helping so many of our clients through the years. So where can people find more from you? Where you want to be followed online? What's your biggest channel these days?
Yeah, I mean, especially if you've got something going wrong just before Prime Day or even during Prime Day, God forbid, you can email info to us, support@ecommercechris.com, or of course the website's ecommercechris.com. There's loads of information about who we are, what we did at Amazon, what we do for appeal strategy now. But the bottom line is, don't hesitate. Don't think too long before you do these things. Get to us early in the decision tree, because at least we can give you a quick opinion, especially if you're a listener or a client of Brent's or of anyone in his ecosystem. Because if you start going down the wrong road, you have to go all the way back to where you started in a lot of cases before you can start going down the right road. And that just costs you time, and it might actually make it harder for us to help you at that point. So reach out to us early.
Well put. Excellent. Okay, great. Well, this has been AMZ Pathfinders Beyond PPC. Thanks everyone for watching. Appreciate it, and have a good day.